What's up, my friends? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to orchestrate a simple passage in 3 different ways. So specifically, we'll go over how to orchestrate this for strings, how to orchestrate this for woodwinds, and how to orchestrate this for brass. More specifically, I'll kind of walk you through how I choose instrument choices for specific parts and the resulting effects that creates for that particular passage. So this is the passage that I've already composed. I'm going to go through and show you how it sounds with strings first, and then we'll use woodwinds and brass to fill it out, and you can kind of hear the differences of how that actually works. But just before we hear the example, in case you're getting into orchestration and you want that framework to actually be able to orchestrate from start to finish with confidence, then I want to give you my Orchestration Essentials guide. It's absolutely free. It basically walks through step by step how I approach every single orchestration I ever do, every single arrangement, from the accession of the first musical idea to the final polished arrangement. So if you want that clear step-by-step workflow, then definitely check that out. It's the first link in the description box below, and you can download it as my gift to you for watching this video today. All right, so without further ado, let me just show you really quickly here what it sounds like, and then I'll walk through the libraries, what's going on here, and then we'll dive in. Here we go. And there we go. So in case you're curious about these patches, what the library is, this is actually the Berlin concertino strings, and I've just pulled up the legato patch for each of the instrument sections. So violins 1, violins 2, violas, celli, and basses. So if we were to leave this as is, this is basically without any divisi, without any extra voices to fill in more harmonic holes. And I always like to challenge myself, and I think it's a great idea for us to limit ourselves to as few instruments as possible and try to make the most of what we have. So in this case, you can see how in the first half, I only used the higher strings, violins 1 and 2, violas and celli, to lay that foundation. And then in the second half, when it gets a little bit more expansive, then we added the double basses to outline more of that harmonic role, whereas the cello gets a chance to play more counter melodies. So what I'll do is highlight the MIDI here so we can see. And down here is all the modulation data. The highest one is the violins one because that's the one that's kind of carrying the melody. So I do want that to be soaring a bit more on top of the rest of the ensemble, which is why you can see it poking up here over the rest. So let's hear this maybe one more time, and then we'll watch the MIDI data at the same time so you can feel or get a sense of how this actually looks with the parts together. Slim this in, and here we go. So something that's relatively traditional in classical music rules is contrary motion, basically having one line go up and another line go the other way or go down. And so this creates that independence in those lines that creates what we call counterpoint, or counterpoint is more like when you have two independent melodic lines going together at the same time, but they work together harmonically. In this case, you're having two opposite figures go in different directions. So you see how the first 3 parts are moving up, usually up by third in this case. So the violins 1 and the violas are kind of going up a third or a fourth, and then we have the violins 2 kind of stepping up a step there. Whereas the cellos or the celli are going down a step. So you get this contrary motion here, up versus down. And then we get the same thing in the second half as well, or in the response. So they separate, break, same idea. So this kind of hints at what's going to come up, right? These first couple chords give us the sense of, okay, this is kind of a soothing, intimate piece, and then we get this warm chord that kind of spreads out. We hear the melody rising, doo-dun, but then we hear the bass going, doo-dun, So it trains the ear to kind of expect that same motion to come up again. So we kind of get the sequence, right? And then after these first two statements, we then get the full do 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 do, that big jump up a fifth in the violins 1, and the violins 2 and the violas kind of follow in that same motion, whereas the cello, the cello kind of embrace the downward motion and go down by step before stepping up to conclude the first half of the phrase. So it sounds like this. Stepping down, and then cello steps up. This would have also worked if I just removed this passing note here and I just went like this. But I prefer to have that little stepping motion because the other three parts are holding a longer sustained note. So it makes sense for the cello to, take the listener's attention and lead them up to that half diminished seventh chord. And of course, here in the modulation, we want to make sure that the phrase is going down, right? Because it's the end of the phrase. We're taking a breath if we're singing it. And so naturally, the emotion, the passion that we hear in the phrase is naturally coming down and tapering off. And then because the line goes up even more in the second half of the phrase, then the modulation can as well be more expansive, a little higher, and you get it coming up over a longer period of time before it settles nicely at the very end and tapers off. So very similar here, but now we have the double basses going down here, taking over the function of what the cello did in the first half. And here's the cello line right here. Right? So this, let me just solo up the cello here so you can see what that looks like. Right, we get this more of a counter melody roll here because the other parts are, especially the top three parts, they're kind of following each other, kind of stepping up together, and then the bass is just outlining that foundation. So there's not much interest happening here. So the cello has a great opportunity to just take over and really pull us along with a counter melody, which complements the main melody in a nice way. And then on the very last chord, then they can all hold together for that contrast. Okay? So that's kind of how I would do it with strings. Violins 1 on the top for sure. Then the violins 2, in this case, they're kind of supporting the violins 1 almost note by note, basically. And then the violas can usually either complement the violins or they can complement the cello. In this case, I decided to complement the violins more instead of the cello. So I used the violas to kind of fill in those remaining chord tones to create those triads and then kind of move in the similar direction so you get those higher chords, whereas the cello outlined the harmonic foundation in the first half and then played its counter melodic role in the second half, and the double basses only came in the second half to take over the harmonic foundation role. So let's see how we would do this with a woodwind section, and then I'll kind of walk through my decision-making process on that as well. All right, so I've gone through and arranged it now for a woodwind section, and let me quickly show you what this looks like. You might notice the MIDI data is slightly changed here. So in terms of the instruments, we have a solo flute, we also have the solo clarinet, a solo English horn, solo bassoon, solo contrabassoon, and finally an alto flute. So before I kind of explain those decisions, let me play it once for you so you hear what it sounds like as well. Here we go. And there we go. So some of the choices here are a little bit more obvious in terms of instrumentation, while others might not be. So let me kind of walk through this. One of the reasons why I chose to split up the melody in the alto flute and then in the flute was for two reasons. Number one, the alto flute, I just really like the warm and a slightly more breathy sound it has. So I really wanted to make sure that the beginning melody, because it starts a bit lower compared to the second half of the melody, I wanted it to be brought out in a warmer context. So I decided the alto flute was a great reason for this, or a great instrument for this. The second reason I chose it was because the very first note, which is a B, Some flutes can play a B too, but other flutes cannot. So that's why I kind of went with the alto flute here, because the lowest note in the regular flute for Cinematic Studio Woodwinds, I believe, is just the middle C. So it doesn't quite go down to the B, but the alto flute can handle that really well. And then the second half, we go to the flute, which can handle the high notes beautifully. Then we went to the clarinet, and I was kind of deciding, do I want the oboe playing the violins 2 part or the harmonic roll underneath, or do I want the clarinet, right? And I decided to go with the clarinet in this case because in its higher registers, when it goes up to playing, really high notes, it still retains its kind of full, rich quality. Whereas for an oboe, it could start to get a little reedy and a little strained. So that's why I kind of went with that. I should be changing this actually, the oboe. Change that name to English horns. So there we go. Now we have flute, clarinet, English horn, bassoon, and contrabassoon. And I just like the English horn here because in contrast with the oboe, which does have that slightly more reedy sound, the English horn is a bit warmer, which I think fits this context a little bit better. And it just makes it feel more comforting in a way, So that's why I went with English horn here. And then bassoon, it kind of plays that harmonic role in the first half, outlines that low end beautifully. And then I wanted to play more of the counter melody in the second half. And then I just brought in the contrabassoon, which is basically an octave below the regular bassoon, to then play the harmonic foundation in the second half. Let me just highlight here so you can see all the parts, and we'll run through this one more time so you can hear what that sounds like. So there's all the parts. Let's take away that modulation there. Okay, and let's have a listen. Now the contrabassoon comes in. It sounds an octave lower than written, by the way, or than played in, so that's why it looks like it's higher here. But there we go. So keeping in mind the respective ranges of the instruments, like the playable ranges, but also where they kind of speak the best, you want to keep those two things in account when you are deciding which instrument you want to use for specific parts, right? So here again, I had to use alto flute because it was a little bit too low to start with, but it also gave me that warmth that I was looking for. Same reason why I used English horn instead of oboe. Some of the lower notes here were kind of out of the oboe range, so I kind of went with the English horn, but it also gave me that warmer texture I was looking for. Clarinet has a huge range, so it played this part beautifully, and then bassoon and contrabassoon played that harmonic role in a very nice way, whereas the bassoon then gets to play the counter melody. And because it's a warmer instrument similar to the cello, it doesn't really protrude in the mix that much. It just makes you feel like there's something else going on rather than having it poke out in the mix. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And finally, let's dive into how we would write this, or orchestrate this, I should say, for the brass. All right, and here we are with the brass arrangement. So I decided to pull in a trumpet for the high part for the melody, and then two solo horns, so horn 1 and horn 2, and then the trombone for the cello roll, and then the tuba for the lowest roll. So probably no surprise there, but let me just play through it, and then I'll share with you a little bit more. Here we go. All right, so the main thing I was worried about was just that very last note in the trumpet, because I knew that it can't really go as high as like the flute or the violins, let's say. So I had to make that slight adjustment, and instead of going up to that high G from the C, I decided to go down to an A instead, which meant that I had to revoice the entire last chord, right? So now we have A, C, G, so we got that wide voicing, but then to get that sad sound, that C minor sound, we have this E flat here in the trombone, and then finally the tuba comes up an octave to just help that last chord set a little bit better. But other than that, I pretty much kept it the same. Because this library is Cinematic Studio Brass, though, I had to take the modulation down quite a few notches because it's a very dynamic library. So you can see here, the modulation never reaches above the midway point here at like 40, right? 44. The top is 127. So I didn't really have to do too much there. But yeah, the only major change was just that very last chord because it would sound really screechy and it would be very difficult for the trumpet to play quietly on that super high note. So if we really wanted to, we could also take the trumpet melody down an octave in the second half, but I did want to hear what it would sound like playing a little bit higher. And that's the great thing about sample libraries, right? Is that you can experiment with different ranges and different layering combinations and see how it all works together. And then for the supporting parts, I decided to go with 2 horns because I thought 2 trombones would be like it would still work perfectly. It would still work, but I just like the sound of the French horn more. It's just a little bit warmer in this context, and it would just be the more natural first choice, in my opinion, for this sort of thing. So let's just hear this one more time, and then we'll wrap it up. So. Tuba has that really nice warm sound that comes in the second half, but the trombone serves this foundation very well to start. Comes in close together, and then the tuba comes in. And I just love how the trumpet has that vibrato that really sounds like it's really trying to reach out for something. Like it's a little melancholic, it's a little bit sad. So that sound quality is just gorgeous. But yeah, that's essentially how I would orchestrate a passage into 3 different ensemble groups, specifically strings, woodwinds, and brass. Of course, we could always mix and match them together. So like strings and brass, strings and woodwinds, woodwinds and brass, and so on and so forth. We could even bring in percussion, but I just wanted to show you my personal workflow of how I make those instrumentation choices and decisions. And really anything is possible as long as you know the limits of those instrument ranges and where they kind of shine the best. And you can kind of have fun with it because, you know, even though they do have their ranges and their limits, some like the best musicians can really push their instruments to the limit if you really need them to. So sample libraries might not give you all those options, but they are great pieces of technology just for trying things out. And so I can highly encourage you to continue trying things out and never feel stuck in that regard. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Hopefully I shared a bit of that process with you. And again, if you're interested in kind of developing your own framework and making sure you go from, you know, your initial idea to that completed orchestration and you want that clear framework, then download the Orchestration Essentials Guide in the description box below. It's 100% free and it walks through my 5-step framework of how I go through from the initial idea to the sketch to the orchestration and final touches and so on and so forth. It should give you that clear, confident framework that you can follow so that every time you approach a new mockup and a new arrangement, you know exactly what to do every step of the way. So thank you so much for watching, my friend. I'll catch you in the next one and take care. See you later. Bye-bye.